Okay, Star Wars fans out there, in this episode of the Mug Live, we look at the Ahsoka movie. Well, it's a fan-made edit of the TV series Ahsoka, but what is it exactly about this Patterson cut that has everyone raving? We take a deep dive into the why with insights from the creator, Kai Patterson, not himself, but a video that he made about it. And also we look at what makes one series bingeable and another completely forgettable. We'll talk about open loops and how it relates to writing, but also psychology. Stay tuned. I was surprised by this movie in many ways.
I gotta say, I was regretting my decision.
I think this would be something I'd show to my kids.
Oh, that's good to hear.
I think it's about a father's love for his child.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And a complete stranger's love for that man's
They
child.
wore really ugly outfits. Puke yellow, prom night, pale blue, you know.
I don't even know where to start with this
Definitely
film.
not a movie I would consider watching unless you told me to. Hello, I'm Derek.
And I'm Peter.
And this is the Mug Live.
In this live Twitch stream, two dudes who are Australian with wonderful, sexy Australian accents talk together about lots of things: media, philosophy, psychology, technology, and in this case, Patterson's.
Patterson's. This is Ahsoka,
And
the
whether or
Patterson
not-
cut. Oh, and whether or not.
What made us laugh?
Yeah.
Made us laugh was made us cry. And
So I
whether or not Ahsoka made us cry.
Yeah.
At the time.
So I just brought up the screen. This is roughly what we're looking at today. But last week, we streamed about California games, and your cousin Alex replied. He saw it.
Yeah.
So he says, "You made it." Yes. Surfing uses
made
B
it.
for a quick turn. Did you know that? B.
What was that? Sorry.
Surfing uses B for quick turn.
B, which is a different thing.
I guess
so I think B was X or something like that.
In half pipe to this
Right.
day, I still don't get how it works.
Yeah, I don't think anyone did. I'm sure there was some people, but yeah,
You had
that
a
was a
flip.
tricky one.
I thought you got the first flip. You got one side.
I
Just
got
not the
one,
second.
yeah, but that was pure fluke. It wasn't exactly. It wasn't. Yeah, I'm not going to chalk that up to any type of skill. That's for damn sure.
And he says, Prince of Persia was gold. Pete, he's got a request. Could you play a few more times and do a personal best?
Can I what?
Do a personal best of Prince of Persia.
I'd be happy to do a personal best.
There you go. There you go, Alex. He says he's keen to play you too, us too. I don't know how. Yeah, I guess we could do a three-way somehow.
Well, he's a musician and a very good one. So
what does he
maybe
play?
we could just hear piano and vocals. He writes he's got his own shtick. He's got his own.
If you want to put anything we can play on the podcast, man, on Alex, you just shoot it through.
Yeah, let us know. I recorded some of his music a long time ago. This was back when I was young, and I didn't have a beard. Well, I'm not sure if I had a beard or not.
Do you have any still that we can access and play and embarrass Alex with?
I will have to get back to you, Derek. Because
and he says it was
search, but I'm
it was
pretty
a
sure
NES. It wasn't. We were talking about what console he had. He had just a NES. It wasn't a Super Nintendo. I think it was just.
Yeah, they always had more advanced technology than us. So we would have an Atari 2600 or a PC, and he'd have Super NES, and then they'd have the next thing and something. And you go over to their place, and there's this big TV screen with them playing games that we could only dream about.
Were they amazing? Like, what were the other games?
And then they would break all their toys. That's right, Alex. You broke every single toy in your house. I'm pretty sure.
You broke the toys, or he broke your toys?
No, he did. He did. He was the toy breaker. I'm pretty sure.
It's always
calling you out, but in your own home too.
Throwing you under the bus, Alex. You better stick up yourself in the comments.
That's right. But yeah, no, I'd love to have another go at Prince of Persia because I watched a bit of it a while ago of our thing, and it was I used to get that like down to like 20 minutes or 30 minutes or something like that.
Ah, because
Like,
you were cutting it close
yeah,
to an hour when you played. We were talking
yeah,
about
it
it.
was good though. I love that tension. Tension's so much better than a personal best, I reckon.
True. Speedrun though, speedrun's a thing. Imagine if you got the world's
Mm,
fastest.
I I doubt it. But yes, no, you're right. I'm awesome. So absolutely, I'll hit that first try.
So we're looking at the Patterson Cut. Last time, I guess you can give
Mm.
another intro because people might not have watched it because we titled that one California Games. So can you tell us a bit about this and how you came into contact with it?
So okay, so the series Ahsoka by Dave Filoni is something a lot of people were looking forward to after Mandalorian, where this is when there was a bit more optimism around Star Wars, where it kind of gone down with like Last Jedi and all of that, and then we had Mandalorian. Things were kind of looking up, and season 3 of Mandalorian was like, nah. Andor was awesome, um, and then when there were some other things as well, and I can't remember what they exactly were, but there's a bit of a significant miss and kind of hits with Star Wars. And then Ahsoka was going to come out. Oh yeah, it was Boba Fett. That wonderfully, like, what the hell was that? Series, which some people seem to like, but I thought was just
Funnily
stupid.
enough, we streamed all of this. I don't remember
Yeah,
most of that, but
I
we
don't know
streamed
either.
Boba Fett, we
I have
streamed
to.
Obi-Wan, we streamed Ahsoka.
Oh, and Obi-Wan too. Yeah, and I recently watched a. There was an interview that Star Wars Theory did with the original writer of what was going to be a movie trilogy of Obi-Wan. Certainly sounded a lot better than the Star Wars series.
Who's this? Who
How
are
it
they
turned
talking
out.
to? The creator.
The original writer for Ahsoka um, wrote. So you know how a lot of movies go through lots of different rewrites and all of that type of stuff. One of the guys, probably the original writer, who like did other things as well. What's his name? Stuart Beetle. Beatty. Sorry, Stuart Beatty. I apologize, Stuart. Who's an Aussie. Um, wrote the Obi-Wan trilogy, so the script for it, and it did sound a hell of a lot better than what we got with the series. Um,
Oh, he's published it.
and no, he did an interview with this guy called Star Wars Theory, who's like the most well-known YouTuber
The angry cap guy.
of. Sorry.
The angry cap guy. He's got the cap and he's always
Oh, he
angry.
always has the cap. That's right.
But
That's
he's
right.
also always angry.
Well, I don't think he's always angry. No, that's someone. I think you might be thinking of someone else. But recently, I would imagine you'd probably get the feeling he's always angry because we had the acolyte,
Yeah.
which is like for someone like all he does is Star Wars. There's nothing
No,
else. So,
I'm sure I saw his stuff on Obi-Wan. He was upset about that too.
oh yeah, I think he was upset about that too. Yeah, there's been a lot of. Well, I mean, you can't necessarily blame him. He's very big into Star Wars, but not just Star Wars. He's big into the prequel trilogy as well. So you and I are kind of like we were in our 20s when the prequel trilogy, or just moving into our 20s when the prequel trilogy came out. So we were really pumped for it when that came out. But I mean, the Phantom Menace was not exactly something it was not what we were expecting when it came out. But people like him were raised on it, so they have a lot rosier view of it because, when you're a kid watching things like that, the kiddie parts might actually resonate or you don't mind them as much.
What were you
But
expecting then about the Phantom Menace?
not Jar Jar Binks.
What were you expecting there?
Not Jar Jar Binks. Well, I wasn't the trailers for it were really cool. You had John Williams' music, which was always inspiring. Like the trailers made it. You like, I do remember seeing the trailers for Star Wars before we saw the films, and it was like the hype was so huge, the energy was so like it was a phenomena
You
was
mean
coming
after
back.
seeing the trailers, you expected things? But what did you expect of a prequel trilogy?
Uh, like action, advent, like the because there was an energy to the trilogy, right? The original trilogy. There was an energy that they tried to capture in the sequel trilogy, which was like this frenetic, fun pace, a lot of stuff going on, but also this beautiful score that underpins everything as well. You know, like with John Williams and the Luke Skywalker thing, all of that stuff was very I mean, we've spoken about it. It's like very Star Wars was huge for us. So you were hoping to get that same energy, but the prequel trilogy didn't have that energy. Like you had because the Jedi were like part of the problem, I think, apart from some of the terrible dialogue in the prequel trilogy, was also the lack of energy that was there that you got in the original. Because you had Han Solo, Leia, and um Luke Skywalker, and they always had this sort of like energy about where they were going, like enthusiasm, or they had very clear characteristics to each of them and motivations. But when the prequel trilogy came out, the first that you're introduced to was, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and they're the Jedi, and they're staid and subdued, not a lot of emotion. So the Jedi are always presented as not having these wise, emotionless, almost characters, which sapped out their energy. You'd have these action sequences, and then you'd have the energy of sort of like the main characters, which wasn't a lot, and then you'd have other things, which was like some really poor choices in terms of the characters. Like you had the what were they called? The Nemoidians, the guys who were like, oh, I want to write to say at once. I'm going to speak with a very terrible accent. I'm going to speak with a very terrible accent. Oh, yeah. Like it was really just
You
like,
mean the Asians or the Lebanese?
yeah, it was like that. Well, I don't know what it was, but it was like really bad.
Or was it the Jamaicans? Misa no likey.
Oh, that was and that was, what was that? And I heard that the reason for him doing that, like, I know that there were people like reviewing it and saying, "Oh, it's racist" and all of that stuff. But the reason, like, the guy that did it, Ahmed Best, from what I saw of an interview, was like he came up with the voice, and it made George Lucas laugh. So George Lucas was like, "Okay, that's the voice. Keep doing that."
You should have given him options, hey. He should have
Yeah.
anyone would have made him
Well,
laugh.
but remember also that George Lucas was like the king during this period. So like everyone went in with the idea of he could do no wrong. Like the people who are going to see the film came in with the idea that this is Star Wars, the best series of movies ever. George Lucas can't do any wrong. So, and I'm pretty sure that that's what a lot of the actors and stuff went in, and they discovered that it's not exactly like that because he's not a person's director. Um, that because a lot of, I think he likes these cerebral ideas that he has, and he
And he's
comes up
always
with,
had
I
really
think, really
strong directors. He knows this because in Empire, the biggest he knew was like a really critical moment. He got his lecturer, who he studied with in film
yeah, his
school,
lecturer to come
to
in and do
direct.
that.
So he got the best that he
That's,
knew to do it, and it was amazing. So he knows.
yeah,
I'm not sure what happened.
yeah.
People actually, I'm sure I heard that people said no. Like he had like Spielberg involved, but Spielberg said no, and
Yeah, I think Spielberg said no, but I also think that he probably believed, because remember, this is a huge gap between when he did the movies and then when he did the prequel series. So I think that he probably had brought up his self view to the point where he thinks, I can do this. Everyone thinks I can do this. I can do this. And I've got all this money and I know what I want. So I'm going to get what I want. And I never got, in the previous series, I couldn't get everything that I wanted. Not realizing that maybe some of the things that you really wanted were stupid. And he had other people to sort of like direct him in there. Like sometimes I think people work best with constraints, but they don't work well if there are no constraints, because because I think life is about being able to make a choice of options. But when you give people too many options, it's really hard to make a choice or to see or to assess your choices. So if you've got 7 choices, you want to assess them more rigorously than if you have 20 choices. If you have an infinite amount of choice or do whatever you want, then you probably aren't going to invest as much thought into whether that one choice you picked that you think, hey, it's me, I'm awesome, is actually a really good choice, because you're not seeing anything else. You're coming up with your own idea.
Well, it was the Red Letter Media. They did a sort of satire about the documentary that was released about the making of Phantom Menace, and he's got this really droning narrative voice. It's really sort of sarcastic
Mark
voice.
Hamill. Sorry, I mean George Lucas. You mean?
The Red Letter Media. He's just narrating this
Oh,
documentary,
right. Yeah.
but it's in a satire way. And but from the footage, you could see that Lucas was over his head, like especially in directing the kids. He says, "Oh, I'm struggling a bit," but the only guy he was confiding to was the executive producer, and he was all about
that
money.
guy was useless.
And he was like, he's just saying he had no input. And like
George, you're just like, baby, you know exactly what you're doing. You're perfect, George. Just keep doing what you're doing.
And he had dollar signs for eyes about, Jar Jar's the first digital character, big dollar signs.
Yeah.
Like it was completely misguided. So, but by the time they got to Rebels, which we'll talk about, because that's where Ahsoka came in, he had sort of atoned for it, and he was looking back to make these really good stories again. And it was in a different medium where he could explore all that stuff and teach other people.
I really don't. I struggle to understand what George Lucas was doing after the movies. Like, I know we talk about him being involved in the Clone Wars and Rebels, but I have no idea how involved he was in that stuff.
There was a big interview with Dave Filoni, and he said he was the prodigy of Lucas, and the first edits came through for the pilots, and he said, you're doing it all wrong, and they forced them to watch all these 1950s war movies. This is how you should cut. This is how, like, you need action, 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 cut, 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 cut. And we really studied that blueprint, and that's where he was sort of teaching a new generation, like, what he discovered in the first Star Wars film, rather than this whole thing that it was blown out of proportion. And it was in a way that was done better, because I just got past season 5. Fuck, it's amazing, man. What they're doing. Like, you were alluding a little bit about the mall stuff to me, but I finally got to watch it, and holy crap, it's stunning stuff.
Which is this, the Rebels one?
Rebels.
Or
Clone Wars. Clone Wars. Sorry, I'm talking about Clone Wars this whole time.
Yeah. Have you seen any Rebels yet?
No, not yet. Sorry, I meant Clone Wars.
There's an episode that you'll get to at some stage called, I think it's called Twin Sons in Rebels, and that's, some people, and you'll be surprised when you actually watch it, but some people consider it to be the best lightsaber fight. Not necessarily because of how long it goes or the complexity of the moves, but actually about the setup, the scene, and the thinking that actually went into every single move that goes on.
What year was Rebels? It was recent, right?
Sorry?
What year was Rebels? When was it released?
I'm too old now to know dates. Things that I thought were like 5 years ago are like 15.
Oh man, I completely boomerized Rebels into
Clone Wars. In my day, we watched digital television.
Okay, 2014. 2014 to 2018. So pretty recent.
Yeah, only 10 years ago.
But I'm of the same opinion as you. I did expect something more of the tone of the original trilogy for the prequel trilogy. But in terms of energy, what we got in the sequel trilogy was more in line with it. But I don't know, how would if you got a movie like that, would you have been satisfied? The Force Awakens, you know?
Force Awakens, I was satisfied with at the start. And I think the reason why was because it created a whole bunch of questions that you were looking forward to in the next film. So you were focused less on the ins and outs of what went on with The Force Awakens, and you kind of forgave certain plot beats, plot points, because you felt a similar energy that was in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's really
because
like that
they,
reaction to it, isn't it? Because he knew that the
Mm,
original trilogy was lacking that, so they almost
mm.
overcompensated in the sequel trilogy.
Well, it was like they had these two things, right? And I think that for Lucas, it's like the energy was down here, but the ideas were good. And then when we had the sequel trilogy, the energy they wanted to get it back up there, but they just were like, hey, look, plot points and depth doesn't really matter that much. And as a result, it became this.
I mean,
Well,
I
it
reckon
became what we know
it
it
could
is.
have got there if they kept with Snoke. He was the big bad. They kept it consistent to what JJ was doing. You know, it would have been a bit better. Like we could see where it was going. It was trying to
It's
be
just amazing,
predictable.
yeah.
Why didn't we keep it predictable? Because there was nothing really unpredictable. I mean, Empire, yeah, it went to Dagobah and we saw different stuff. So it kind of took a turn, but like it shouldn't
Well,
have taken
people
such
talk
a big turn.
about the whole who Darth Vader's, who Darth Vader actually was the huge twist. Like a huge twist for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But
So he was trying to recreate a
yeah,
huge twist. And
but it wasn't a twist. That's the
so
problem.
the reason why I
I'm
wanted
not a fan of Rian Johnson. I think which is like I know clear to you, but for our new viewers, I'm not a big fan of Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi. Because he's just it's like looking at a guy who thinks way too much of himself and has a very highly inflated view of his own intelligence.
was he did
Um,
he make something recently? I thought I saw his name pop
Knives
up.
Out. He made. I don't know what his most recent was, but the movies that I think he's known for that I'm aware of was Looper, and then the two Knives Out and Glass Onion, and The Last Jedi. And he wanted to with Knives Out and Glass Onion. He wanted to recreate
Oh yeah,
the
Glass
whole
Onion, yeah.
Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, all of that, stuff. But so he created his own kind of character. But the problem is that this guy has like a really overinflated idea of his own intelligence and what he creates. So his ideas aren't as deep as he thinks they are. They have flaws in them that, it doesn't take too long to kind of say, hang on a sec. I bought into this for like 30 seconds and then upon reflection, it's actually kind of stupid. Like Looper was like that for me, where this whole, what you do to yourself right at that point in time affects your past, but it doesn't affect it all the way up into the point that you are now. It didn't make any, after a while, like I thought about it. So it's like, look, it sounded cool, it looked cool, but it didn't make any sense.
It was the wrong choice to get him on a kept JJ for the whole three. I think he had other
But
commitments
even
though.
JJ, he's not that great with plot.
But they even talked. Oh no, that was something else. Anyway, the reason why I asked you about what you would like is because these what you expected, you know, was because these guys listened to our Ahsoka thing.
Okay, Star Wars fans out there, you know
Can
we
you
love
hear
to
this?
like dive deep into your passions. And today, it's all Ahsoka all the time.
Yeah.
You sent us this really interesting discussion from the Mog Live.
Right.
Derek and Peter, they really get into the series premiere.
And it's interesting because they weren't watching it passively. They were really watching it analytically, like almost picking it apart as they went.
Yeah, and they even talk about how that like changes how you experience the show.
Yeah.
Because if you're not hitting pause every 2 minutes to like analyze the plot, maybe you'd be more forgiving.
Sure.
Maybe more willing to just be swept up in the action.
Yeah, context is everything, right? Like watching on a big screen versus on your couch at home. Totally changes things. But they're, the kind of analytical eye it brings up this fascinating contradiction in these first couple episodes,
Mhm.
which is fantastic action, but some really head-scratching logic choices.
Yeah, like case in point, Derek could not stop talking about that Corellian fight scene.
It was good.
Droids, humor, those lightsaber duels, like classic Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
But then that opening scene on the rebel ship,
Oh, yeah.
it's like they both had a hard time swallowing that one,
It's like the writers forgot that these were seasoned rebels,
right?
that these weren't rookies.
Like they've been doing this.
The welcoming party for a mysterious shuttle with no precautions whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, the dialogue in that scene, they were practically howling.
Oh, I remember them quoting it on the podcast. It's like, let's bring him aboard. And hey, while we're at it, let's get like 6 people for a welcoming committee.
Exactly.
Like a surprise attack has never happened in Star Wars before.
Ever. And that's where their analytical approach really kind of highlights something crucial about this, right?
Right.
Which is that the writing,
I
the choices
didn't
being
know
made are
this.
undermining the believability of these characters.
Yes.
You know, seasoned rebels wouldn't just waltz into a potential trap like that.
Right, and this kind of leads into this whole stupid rebels debate that they get into.
Yes.
Derek is very much on the side of this is a recurring Star Wars problem.
Mhm.
Peter, not so much.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating discussion because it kind of makes you wonder, is bad writing a trope?
Fuck
Like, can we
Peter.
analyze recurring themes? Sure, but can we really call predictable or illogical choices a trope?
Especially because, as they pointed out, shows like Andor got so much praise for their like gritty realism.
Totally.
So is it just lazy writing when we see these stupid rebel moments?
Right.
Or are we, as viewers, are we expecting a certain level of action over logic in our Star Wars?
Yeah, are we giving it a pass because it's space fantasy?
Yeah.
Or do we need to hold it to a higher standard because we know that it can deliver both?
Right.
You can have thrilling action and smart character choices.
And that leads us to, I think, their thoughts on Ahsoka herself. They both found her a bit, I don't know, off-putting
Yeah.
in these first episodes,
Yeah.
especially compared to Ewan McGregor's performance as Obi-Wan.
Right.
They found him to have a lot more nuance.
Which, of course, sparks the age-old question, is it the actor? Is it the director? Or is it the writing?
Yeah.
Like, is Ahsoka's kind of stilted demeanor? Is that intentional? Is there something else
Hang
going
on
on?
a sec.
It's
They're
interesting though
talking
because even
about
when they're
they're
being
taking
critical,
our
you can really
ideas.
feel their passion for Star Wars.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that
That's
comes through
awesome.
especially clearly when the conversation turns to Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, you can practically hear the longing in their voices.
Right.
Like, they are dying for a story about Luke in his prime, at the peak of his Jedi powers.
Which of course makes their disappointment with how the sequel trilogy handled Luke really hit home.
Totally, yeah.
Because it does feel like there's all this like untapped potential there, right?
Oh, yeah.
To see a Jedi Master who's
Totally.
not weighed down by the fate of the galaxy, but actually like really embracing his power.
And to illustrate their point, they bring up this great anecdote from that What If Star Wars Was Awesome project.
Oh yeah.
You remember that one? Where somebody basically just fed the entire Star Wars saga into an AI.
Yes.
And they're like, make it awesome.
Okay, yes. I love those like what if scenarios, so tell me more.
Okay, so picture this. A bomb is about to level Coruscant.
Okay.
Right? Total galactic destruction. And Luke, in this version, is this total badass Jedi Master
Right.
who just casually uses the Force to contain the explosion.
Whoa.
Like, it's no big deal. He just saves countless lives while standing in the middle of this like fiery
But
apocalypse.
that's, I mean, that's not even using the Force. That's like bending reality.
It's amazing. And it really gets to the heart of what I think they're saying, which is that they want to see that level of like epic Jedi action.
Yes.
They don't want it hinted at. They don't want it just in the animated shows. They want like full-on Force God Luke
Mhm.
on screen in live action.
So are they projecting that onto Ahsoka, do you think?
Maybe.
Like hoping that she's going to deliver the kind of Jedi mastery
It's possible.
that in their view the sequels didn't?
Yeah, it's like they're yearning for a return to that sense of awe and wonder that, you know, drew us to Star Wars in the first place.
Right.
That feeling that anything is possible.
Speaking of possibilities, there's this interesting thing that Derek and Peter never really explicitly address. They spend all this time dissecting Ahsoka and, you know, yearning for those epic Luke moments.
Right.
But they never actually say
Right.
what they would do with a Luke Skywalker story in this era.
It's true. They lay out all the desire, like Luke in his prime,
Mhm.
the Force Unleashed, all that.
Yeah.
But they don't actually give us their vision of it.
Right. It's almost like they're inviting us to kind of fill in the blanks ourselves.
So, listener, it's up to you.
Yeah.
What epic stories are waiting to be told about Luke Skywalker at the height of his powers?
Right. What challenges would test even his mastery of the Force? What kind of adversaries would it take for a Jedi Master to really let loose? I mean, what would be like the ultimate what if Star Wars was awesome moment for Luke Skywalker?
Right. Like maybe he's out there training a new generation of Jedi,
Yeah.
facing down threats that the New Republic isn't even aware of.
Right.
Or maybe he's venturing into the unknown regions,
Mhm.
confronting like ancient evils,
Mhm. Yeah.
really pushing the boundaries of what we thought a Jedi could be. It's so interesting. I mean, whatever you envision, I think it's clear that there's this real hunger out there
Yeah.
for those classic Star Wars themes.
Mhm.
You know, hope, heroism, good triumphing over evil, but kind of elevated
Yeah.
to a whole new level.
Yeah, and maybe just maybe Ahsoka is the first step on that journey.
Maybe.
Even if she's not wielding the Force in quite the same way that Luke does,
Right.
she still embodies that same spirit
Absolutely.
of resilience,
Mhm.
of fighting for what's right no matter the odds.
So as you continue watching Ahsoka's journey unfold,
Yeah.
keep that question in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
What incredible feats of the Force
Mhm.
are you hoping to witness? What stories are you ready for the galaxy far, far away to tell?
I like it. I think that's a good place to leave it for this deep dive
Yeah.
into Ahsoka and, you know, the legacy of Luke Skywalker.
Absolutely.
Big thanks to Derek and Peter over at the Mog Live for the great discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys.
And thank you all for listening and for sending us the stuff that you are passionate about.
Yeah, keep it going.
Till next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
Cool, eh?
Wow. I didn't know that actually people listen to us.
What do you think?
That's great. No, I really appreciate that people actually, yeah, taking down the stuff that we're saying. And I like the challenge of someone saying, "Hey, what would you do with Luke?" You know, you talk so you're talking up all of these things that you'd like to do. But I mean, one of the things that we did in Obi-Wan was we really did break down what we would have liked to have seen with the Obi-Wan series, and we went into that very deep. Which is actually when I watched the Star Wars Theory interview was still very different from what we talked about, which was a lot more staid, nuanced, dealing with stuff and shot very differently. I think that was also part of because of the inspiration that for me from watching Andor, where it sort of Andor opened the idea that you could actually do something a lot more nuanced with Star Wars. And it sort of, to me, Andor opened up so many possibilities of what you could be doing with Star Wars outside of just the same beats that you see with what Dave Filoni does. Because, like you were just talking about how he was inspired like he was the protege of George Lucas, and George Lucas says, "Oh, you got to do it this way, and you got to make sure that you've got B-12 bombers." And I'm kidding, but yeah, he's talking about the beats. But Andor was very different from that, which to me shows that you can do great Star Wars outside of what they consider to be there's just the same beats. Like I think that's one of the things that you see with a lot of Star Wars is they want to create what they consider to be what Star Wars is and its beats, and sometimes I don't know, don't. It's kind of funny because then you watch the Acolyte and it's just like they don't give a crap about what the beats are for Star Wars. They're just doing what they think they want to do for themselves.
I don't know. I'd argue that Clone Wars. I made a mistake before. It's not Rebels. Clone Wars. Fucking hell, it was amazing. They did all the Star Wars stuff, but they smashed it out. And there's even an episode that was the same as Acolyte, where she's a fugitive and she runs into the tunnel and has to dive off. Same exact thing, but done perfectly well. Like there's no, oh, I believe you.
I don't care.
You know, but it has all the Star Wars beats. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to rewrite the genre because we're fans of
No,
this
no, it
Star
doesn't.
Wars.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you have to, but I think that you're constraining yourself if every director thinks that they have to recreate the vibe of like trying to figure out, okay, what is it to be Star Wars? Like Andor to me is like it's picking the it's like looking at Star Wars as its history. It's like saying there's this point of time in the history of this galaxy that certain things happen, and this is an opportunity to talk about what it is for rebellions to develop and empires to run and the people that operate within those. So it's an exploration of part of the Star Wars universe from a very different perspective, and it's shot differently and thought of differently. It still has lots of homages to things of George Lucas, like what was it, TKX? What was his original film? You know, the
Oh,
the
THX.
short THS, with like where they build the assembly base and all that white and all that type of stuff. But like Andor was a very different exploration of that, and it works in this galaxy of Star Wars. So I think Andor is an example where you don't have to follow the medium of what it is to ask the question, to answer the question what it is to be Star Wars. But Dave Filoni, I think, wants to replicate George's vision of Star Wars in terms of how shows and televisions run
In Ahsoka.
in accordance with that. Yeah, I think he did that very much with Ahsoka. I think he sort of bought. I think Filoni's bought into the prequel and the original trilogy in terms of what he wants to deliver, particularly the prequel trilogy, because I mean he did Clone Wars and all of that stuff. But there's a definite vibe, and I mean it kind of has to be because he's created the way that that the Jedi operate. Like the thing that Lucas did with the Jedi was make them this wise, staid order where they don't express a lot of emotion and stuff, which I think is really hard for actors. Whereas, okay, you're going to play this really, you have to be a really good actor playing a very boring, emotional character.
I don't know.
because you
Like
have
I'll jump in a bit then to Clone Wars because I was going to talk about it. The way what they did with these characters was amazing. Like they started off with that with Anakin in
Yeah.
particular, but they took him to this level where he's got so much emotion and depth in a character that's like 3D created. There's nothing human about him, but the voice acting. And same with Ahsoka. There's so much range in this, in their Jedi, and
Those two
battling.
characters, absolutely. I
They're
agree with
battling
you.
with all of these concepts, and they've done it in a framework which allowed for
Yeah.
that because they're on the outside, and so they
But
don't
I
really
think
fit in.
the thing about that, though, I will say, is that
But that's the
reason
writing
that
that
they
put them there, right?
sorry.
that's the writing that put them as outsiders, and they don't fit the
Yes,
mold.
that's right.
So it's
So,
written really
which
well.
allowed them to have that range.
Yeah.
But as soon as what I think would have been better would be to allow people within what would be considered the normal Jedi range, let's say, to not be these like I think
This
it would be better if they were compassionate, expressive of emotion, but wise, not lacking emotion and trying to appear to be wise, if that makes any sense.
this is exactly what we got, isn't it? Which leaves my head
What?
scratching. I'm showing it on the screen. Just Ahsoka's,
Oh, sorry.
just her sort of very neutral expression most of the time. Same with
Yes, that's
Sabine.
right. Which is what they encourage is the idea of what it means to have Ahsoka.
And I don't know if you saw it before, but this was what we saw in Clone Wars, like a huge amount. There's a difference there, you know. That's what I'm trying to highlight here. Is just it's a
I'm trying to
directorial
bring it up.
thing.
Yeah, so yeah, and then you got two narky characters who have a past narking on each other. Like I think the other thing as well is that if the only like they created the main relationship between these two characters was one of there was a conflict, and because that was the primary focus was this conflict between these two characters, it didn't allow them to have much other expressions of emotion, because there wasn't conflict between characters that actually got along or like people banding together against something else. I mean, you did have Ahsoka with her friend, the other girl. I've forgotten her name, but you know, Ewan McGregor's wife. That's all
All
I can
right,
think
yeah.
of. Her name.
Harry's
Oh yeah, Hera.
Hera. Sorry, Hera.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of Xena,
where Xena.
Hades, and fucking Ares, the God of War. Oh my god.
I'm just imagining Xena jumping into a scene with
Lucy
Balin's
Lawless,
skull, and
anytime.
it's
Lucy Lawless and Balin. That's like heaven for me.
so you must.
That's funny.
Your fear and anger has made you irrelevant in this day and age. You need to be wiser and more considerate.
So really, that brings us to this guy. Hi, Patterson.
Yeah,
and he's done other
he got
edits
there
before.
eventually. Yeah. So, and in the previous episode of the Mog Live, we looked at the first half of that, and discussed it.
Yeah. I can give you some of our points. I'll just run through briefly. I've got a little summary here. So it improves the pacing and flow. It heightens the emotional impact by cutting down extraneous elements. But on the downside, there is a little bit of loss of character development and impactful scenes, particularly in the beginning. Establishing character development, and potential for a constructed feel, because he's had to hack away, he has to really chop it down. He was getting 6.5 hours, 6 hours down to 2.5 hours. So these are the side effects of doing that.
Well, I think also because there was a challenge of you could see that certain scenes were there for a reason, but they actually, in trying to do one thing, but they also created problems in another way. So in trying to establish relationships and motivations, but in a way that actually made it more detrimental to the overall plot and flow of the series. So it was better to cut it out than it was to leave it in there.
And he's got this making of, which I'll go through in a bit, but there are some, there's a relationship between film and television. So this is really a film, and so in the film, it demands a tighter narrative structure. So that's the goal of the film. You have to be as tight as you can, but TV is a different thing. Like, it allows for more expansive storytelling, character development. So they're really different beasts to begin with. That's I think at the core of it as well. But we're in this age where it's not a TV series like Clone Wars where it's 20 episodes. It's 10 tight or 8 tight episodes, usually an hour long sometimes episodes. So the line between film and television is increasingly blurred. So I think that's why you can do these sort of edits now, because you're not on these B stories that go nowhere. It's all actually a very elongated film experience.
Well, yeah, it's more like they're trying to do a trilogy, but it's actually an octilogy. It didn't.
You didn't end up talking about that trilogy thing. Can you can you sum it up?
Oh, so I recently saw there was an interview between Star Wars Theory and one of the original writer for the Obi-Wan movie trilogy, which was going to be out instead of the series. I think this was before Solo was a flop. So it was with what was his name? Stuart Beatty,
Yeah.
an
What's your
Aussie. Good
summary of
on
it?
you. And it sounded a hell of a lot more interesting than what we got. And in the end, Obi-Wan apparently lost instead of won.
Really?
But there was still the cut thing and that type of stuff happening. And Vader was very much obsessed with tracking down Obi-Wan. But the whole idea was that actually Reva was going to say that she killed Obi-Wan, and in a fit of rage, Vader would kill her.
So she was saving him. She was saving Obi-Wan by death.
I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember exactly, but I think that there might have been something along those lines.
I see. Interesting.
But
I like that.
yeah.
And so Kai,
Well,
he did a cut of that. Did you see that? Cut of
I
Obi-Wan?
haven't actually seen that. Oh no, I've watched a bit. I watched a bit of it. It was better. They cut out a lot of crap.
So
But there was a
his
lot of
background
crap
is
in it.
visual effects. So he's an amazingly
yeah.
talented guy. But that's his lens, visual effects. He does write and direct, but I think his main thing is VFX. So that's why he does these things with chopping heads off and coloring the eyes, and because that's his specialty and it adds his flavor to it. It's almost like an ad for him. It's a very clever thing because you're reaching a huge audience by doing this.
Yeah.
And growing your fan base. But this is his premise. Actors' performance to tell the story. Dialogue comes second. Show don't tell. So that's a very specific
show don't
way.
tell. That's a very common phrase that a lot of people have. It's just like if you can show the story rather than tell it, then you're making use of the medium.
And he was saying where Sabine got stabbed. Too many people in Star Wars are being stabbed with no consequence. That's why he cut that out. And he said it. He said it straight matter of fact. But
it's yeah. I think that the problem, like when you think about it, right? A lot of these shows are being developed around the same time, or there's probably not necessarily a lot of communication going on between them. So they're not exactly thinking, what if we stab them, and haven't we got enough of that? They're like it just seems that maybe they all had a chat and they talked about, maybe a good idea would be for people to get stabbed and some I don't know. But I mean, like, the justification for it could be, Luke lost his hand, right? Luke's hand got chopped off in Empire. It's not a very good reason, particularly if they're all getting stabbed and not losing limbs.
One thing that I completely agree with him on is that there's a trend in current media, almost all media, is to desaturate it, and I don't know why. So he's actually gone through and color graded everything to look a bit more lively. The yellow is a brighter yellow, and I think that's amazing. Because fucking hell, it infuriates me that everything's like grayscale like this and just toned down. It doesn't have to be. And once your eyes adjust, we see whatever we want. But this is his thing. He's getting 6.5 hours down into 2.5. So anywhere that he could cut, he would cut. So
and there was a lot to cut that you could cut, which was good.
And you know, there's a little, but the thing that he did talk about it later on, but he said what I notice in Dave Filoni's versions, there's little nods to martial arts films. Like he's using a katana for a reason. Like he replaced it with he replaced the Kai replaced it with a lightsaber to give his own flair to it, but it was a katana to begin with, and there was a reason for that. Like there's all these nods to, like, it starts off with her on the bike. That's a nod to Akira. You know, zooming in this bike. There's this real nod to Japanese storytelling, and you know, she's basically a samurai too. Like, and she's doing all these Bruce Lee sort of expressions. He ended up cutting that stuff, saying it slowed it down. But I believe that was the whole point. That's what Filoni was going for. He was trying to do a kung fu sort of Japanese samurai.
Oh, he's definitely interested in that side of things. Absolutely. If you've seen some of his Clone Wars ones, and they're so steep in that. Like, I think he's more into the samurai stuff than he is the gunslinger side of things, which is kind of what Star Wars sometimes seems to play between, is either the gunslinger side or the samurai thing.
Yeah, that's the Jon Favreau side, isn't it? The Western side.
Yeah, the Western. Yeah, that's right. Like you had the what is it, the duel scenes and all that sort of stuff in the Mandalorian. But the problem that I sometimes have with these people who want to do homages is that sometimes I feel like they sacrifice story and good ideas for a homage. Like they say, I really like this shot, I want to recreate it in my show. And it's just like, well, it would be better if you came up with something that was relevant to the plot rather than trying to recreate a shot. And like, I feel like the intent behind it is the wrong intent. Like, your intent should be ultimately about your series, regardless of homages or callbacks or I have a bad feeling about this or all of that sort of stuff. Like, I think those things are. I know that some people really respond to those, but I feel like if you're doing it in a way that's just like a wink to people, if you're doing it to the sacrifice of the overarching plot, or you're writing it so that it exists in your story, because then you're just jamming something in there that isn't necessarily going to work with the flow. I mean, the fact that he cut these scenes out, even though they're homages, kind of shows you that they were, as much as they were homages, they weren't actually that.
He acknowledged it later on. He says, I know Dave Filoni was going for a samurai build-up, which works for show form. So he acknowledges it's a different beast. It's a movie. There's no time for that here. And the other example I would give is... What's that? This stuff? This type of battle stuff?
The problem that I have with things like samurai is the taking out of emotion, right? Which is not what was successful in the original series for Star Wars. Like,
oh yeah,
all your characters in Star Wars were heavily invested emotionally in different things. Like, they're like, Leia was very compassionate. Luke Skywalker was very enthusiastic, and like, just wanted to. He was just like, enthusiasm, I guess, would probably have been like, I'm just talking about the original Star Wars movie, the first one, and Han Solo was very much self-centered, gunslinger, like in it for himself, but in a like a humorous, energetic way, and playing off with Chewie. But when you introduce the samurai element of things, it's almost like you are telling the actors that they have to act a certain way.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
As soon as it's like,
true.
you need
it
to
bleeds
be a samurai,
into the rest.
This is the it's like, as soon as you introduce that type of stuff, you're asking your actors to play a caricature, not a character.
But it gets even more complex because the intro was, and we even commented on it in our watch through the first time, it was an Indiana Jones intro. And we even said that. We said, "Oh, we're getting Indiana Jones vibes from this." When
Oh,
she
this is
we hadn't
the
seen anything
yeah, yeah.
else, but she cuts this thing with the lightsaber, and we're impressed. Like she does all this
Yeah.
stuff. And
It's
she was
cool. It was really cool.
She was kind of a different character, which makes sense because when you tell her to act this way for a samurai film, she'll act that way. When you tell her to act like Indiana Jones for an Indiana Jones film, she'll act that way. So
Yeah.
it's the
Oh, this
director's
isn't a
fault.
criticism of the actors, that's for sure. Like,
So
like
it's
these
the director's
actors
fault.
don't get. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the director and the writer's fault because, like, when you create the plot beats, the actors have to work within that medium, and then if you add the constraint thing of this is your motivations or this is what type of thing I'm going for in terms of this character, then you're further constraining them. So if you're taking her emotion out because you're a samurai warrior, wise, very like as soon as people talk about people being very experienced, wise, uh, very stayed in their energy and all this sort of stuff, what you're asking them to do is be like a statue. It's
Yeah.
just like you're taking away the ability for people to
You're
empathize or at
hamstringing them.
least connect. You can't connect with that. How do you connect with that? You're creating a character designed for you to not connect with.
Yeah. And the other thing we talked about in that first watch through was that how I said I wasn't a fan of the whole introduce the MacGuffin, the map. Now they got to go find it. Do we have to do this again? And he just cut it
Nope,
out.
we didn't.
So he
He
cut
showed
all
you
of
we
that out.
didn't.
Yeah. So that was good. Like he knows that it's a trope that's unnecessary, and yeah, he proved that it wasn't. So amazing work. This stuff apparently came from a request on Discord. So he's got a Discord that he edits and shows pre-edits to, and they said, "Oh, what if you show the eyes as flashes of that?" So it's not just him. He's getting some feedback from his community and things like that.
Which is good. We're not all like we're not. There's always good ideas out there that we haven't thought of because we're all human. And
I don't
the
know
greatest
about this
writer in the
one though.
world.
I don't know about this one. What do you reckon about that?
What do you mean?
Showing that she's more
Her
of a
face.
Sith. Her eyes, they changed the eyes to Sith glows.
Oh.
That's what I
because we
mean
don't really
specifically.
know where
Someone
her-
in the Discord asked him to do that, and he said, "Oh yeah, okay." And he's a VFX guy.
I do believe it. I believe it because her character is very much emphasized in herself. Like her character demonstrated that sort of leaning from the start. To
I
me, it's
think
not
towards the end, though, that was only more evident. There was a bit more ambiguity. She took pauses when she said, about power. She was a little bit hesitant. It wasn't like straight black and white Sith then.
The first scene that we had with her was murdering the crew of a spaceship.
That was the first scene, but then the dialogue, that's where you find out about her character.
Yeah, but her eyes don't turn there at that stage. It turns when she starts to emphasize anger, like all of the characteristics that you associate with being a Sith, anger and, enjoyment of power. And like in that moment, she talks about when they did that, she's like saying that you have no power, and she's angry. Like there's a lot of emotion that she's wrapped up in, and none of them are like good emotions.
Fair enough.
So I think it makes sense for it to happen at that stage. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be there, but it really emphasizes, like it depending on. I think it potentially changes what the character's arc could be because it's setting up her character leanings very early. So it's like she's already pretty much.
I think in that way it
on the
limits
dark
it.
side path. Yeah, no, it does.
Whereas
does
she
limit
can
it.
be more complex. She can turn either way. She doesn't have to be that thing.
Yeah. Well, she's a lot more. This actually you're right. It makes her less ambiguous. It definitely highlights where her leanings are,
And like she had
Right.
to walk away with the tails between her tail between her legs at the end and submit to the people that were on the planet because she lost her master. So there is a possibility that she can change. And
Hmm.
doesn't that limit this?
But that also, well, no, not necessarily, because just like as we've got examples in the past, a person can be Sith but not stay Sith. So,
So we just forget that happened.
but it
Is
could,
that-
yeah, or it could be that she's just very much invested. Like she was very quickly susceptible to the dark side, and there's room for that to change. Or it could be that she just gets worse. I don't know.
Yep. And so we were commenting in the first episode about, and we talked about it. There's, in depth already. But he agreed. Her face is a little annoyed at Sabine for some
Yeah.
reason. So performance wise, I don't like this as their first interaction in the whole movie. So he cut this and he put in a shot of her smiling at Sabine. So he's aware of it too, which is good because it's not
Yeah.
just us. Like
It did work a lot better when there was more like she didn't say like there was a lot more smile. Like you noticed that she was actually smiled more in this film. Like there was more smiling and less film.
Yeah.
Or at least the same amount of smiling and a lot less frowning taken out.
Well, I said it
A
in
lot more
our first watch
frowning.
through. He's trying desperately to inject any life he
Yeah.
can into this film. And so he does so with music. He cuts out scenes where, there's too much talking. And that actually, so he covered her mouth when she was talking. He just put a CGI thing of her lips.
Oh, really?
And he cut the audio because it's better if we sit with an emotion sometimes, we don't need to be told. And so if he was editing this script, he says, I would have taken that line out of the script. The line adds
What
nothing
was
to
it?
it.
Which line?
I can't remember, but he says it interrupts the flow, and it's true. Like he's really just. I think she said something sassy, like, Sabine. It's always
Yeah.
Sabine, actually.
Oh,
Mostly.
yeah, it's always been. Yeah, well, that was the other thing that I was going to say was there's a problem with that character. Like, her whole unfortunate, like, and the thing is that what I feel is a bit of a shame sometimes is you don't actually know whether an actor is good or not. I mean, you know when an actor is great because, like, the Balin Skull actor, as an example. But it isn't necessarily indicative that an actor is really terrible. I mean, you had Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson playing, like, people love Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan in the original trilogy, but still, they were pretty Jedi wise type dealio. But Sabine's character has been written to be very annoying.
Yeah.
Like,
and he ended up just cutting the dialogue. So
he had to, because she was just like I think he tried to give her a bit more emotional flow beyond her being sassy, annoying, and self-important. But you had to cut so much out in order for that not to show through. Because, like, when you first introduce her character, she's feeding the pet. She's looking at the video of Ezra. All of these things are trying to make you empathize with this character more. She's got her hair down. She's not making negative remarks or complaining.
he's improved it a lot, okay. The tone of it.
But,
and I should mention,
but
I
every
finally.
time she.
Sorry, go.
No, it's all right. Well, every time that she was introduced in on those early episodes, she always had a problem with something.
It was
or she was always, and then it was like she made this mistake with the map getting stolen because she stole the map. And it's just like, it's just frustrating for the watcher to watch someone make stupid mistakes and then suffer for those stupid mistakes, and everyone else suffer for those stupid mistakes, and then you're supposed to empathize with this character.
Yeah, it's too conflicting. And I was just going to say, I finally caught up into Clone Wars, where we meet Hugh One, and he was teaching all the young Jedi to make lightsabers. So that's where it actually makes sense, like some of his dialogue now, where he's saying, "I've taught many Jedi to make, lightsabers. I never knew what the hell they were talking about until now." So
So
there's
I think that
callbacks here.
that's okay. I actually think that that was okay. It didn't need to be in the series.
But it adds a bit of
Like
depth.
highlighted.
Like they're nodding to
It
it.
does. Yeah.
And
I think that like when you watch a lot of movies that were just like if you watch the original trilogy, there are pass away lines that people have turned into series or episodes like or given a history to that didn't actually originally have that history written out. Like talking about the Clone Wars, you fought in the Clone Wars, yes, I was once a Jedi Knight like your father, and all of these
I know it was
pass away
one line
lines.
in Obi-Wan's script, hey, and it made this whole huge thing.
Yeah.
And they
So,
had to.
but that's
It gave so much work to Kiwis.
yeah. But what I mean is that sometimes you don't have to say everything about a character and their history. You just need to intimate that they have a history and let the person figure out to some extent what that is. You don't have to say like, yes, I was once a Jedi Knight like your father. From the years 2027 to 2025, I was engaged in hostile activities and aggressive negotiations. And then from that point on, I met your father, who was a bit of a turd, but I raised him up like he was my son, and he really started shagging this older lady that he liked when he was a child, and she liked him when he came of age, and it was all worked out rather well until he betrayed us all, murdered everyone and all the children in the Jedi Temple, and then proceeded to have a fight with me, and we swung our lightsabers around, chopped, and then he decided to jump over the top of me, so I chopped his arms and legs and off, and then he burned what I thought to death, and he turned out to be Darth Vader. But
yeah.
enough about me. Let me tell you
Oh,
about
that's
the
right.
Force.
R2 was there the whole time.
Yeah.
And C3PO, your father made him.
Yeah, but he had his memory wiped. No, yeah, that's right. By the way, C3PO there. Did you notice him right there? Yes, your father made him. Did you know that? That's quite the coincidence.
And so, yeah. I guess we talked about the first half in detail. In the second half, he improved this scene a lot. I've got it up on the screen where he finally meets Anakin, and there's a huge callback to the relationship that they had together, Anakin and Snips, and he actually calls her that. So it's amazing to see that, and he's really focused in on this emotion. And it's a lot more readable. I don't know, it just felt different. He hasn't talked about it in terms of how he cut it, but I did definitely feel it. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think all of this stuff was really great. Sometimes I was still trying to figure out, like, in some ways, there was a messaging about live or die that kind of. It wasn't that it. I was kind of trying to figure out exactly what that meant, and how the imagery that was being shown related to that. Like, I didn't quite pick up on exactly what the message was supposed to be for her to, you know, for it to have an impact on her. But like, it's still, I think it still worked really well. But it's just that
For
I
me,
felt there was a bit of
that
ambiguity there.
line, it's sort of an old script writing technique that my lecturers at film school always said. It's got to be life or death. For the story to have the biggest impact, it has to be life or death. So for me, that was just bringing it back to high stakes. From starting from scratch, he had no time, and so it became very high stakes immediately when it's life or death.
Yeah.
So
But the messaging and I, but the imagery and the messaging about what was going on wasn't about her choice to live as to survive drowning or whatever was happening to her. Like, she hadn't there was no indication that she'd given up on living.
No.
The message wasn't, to me, it was less about live or die, and it was more about more like see the roses or smell the roses,
I
because
mean, there wasn't enough for us to go on in terms of the
but
philosophy of it. It was very
yeah,
cursory.
but that's the thing about it. It's just like I feel like there was a message there that they could have conveyed, and I don't think live or die was the right way of summarizing that message. It was a nice clear message of saying live or die, but the actual images and the messaging that seemed to go on was less about, it was more about, and I think we talked about this in the last one, that it's an example of her connection with this person as her mentor who turned to the dark side, and that she was that even like Jedi weren't supposed to be brought up as warriors; they were supposed to be peacekeepers. But she was born in a war where it was all about death and fighting and being a soldier in an environment that, like, as a Jedi, that's not really what it should have been about. So her choice now would have been less about, does she want to continue to be a soldier? Like, it would be more about whether she wanted to continue to see herself as like this dying out samurai, or reinventing herself as something more than just what she was brought up to be. And that's not about living or dying. That's more about, do you want to grow or to stay or to stagnate? And I'm not saying that would be the words that he should say, grow or stagnate,
Not as
because I
catchy as
don't
that.
think they have the same. No, it's not as catchy, but you get what I mean. It's like, it seems to be that the message is because I know in those moments they always talk about fighting to, you know, give up or to persevere when you're about, like, if you give up now, you're going to drown and die, or you're going to fight your body and your way through your own mental perseverance to live beyond this point. Which I get that, but the imagery and the messaging of those Clone Wars scenes wasn't about that. That it wasn't. There was no point in which there was a discussion about her giving up. There was no, but I've given up. Like, there was nothing about her in a conflict as to, I've done my part, I've done enough. Like, isn't this enough? I don't think I need to continue to persevere and move on. There was none of that kind. Like, that's the type of messaging that I would think with the message of live or die is about. Have you come to the end of where you see yourself as? Have you given as much as you have to give? Can you give more? Or is it just too much? Those are the types of things that I think for, like, live or die and persevere beyond that point. But that's not the messaging that I got from those scenes.
What was it? What was the messaging you got?
About her being a child of war
Oh, yeah.
during in a way that was against who she was as a person, and about what it is to be a Jedi.
Yeah, it's
And
confusing.
that he embraced the idea of, like, he went to the dark side, war, murder, killing, all of that stuff, which they were both brought up in. Those further enabled him to go down that path. Does she want to continue to go down that path with him because she was raised in the same type of environment?
I think
that
he
type
took a
of
lot of liberty there, and he condensed it down to essential. It wasn't actually going into the depth that you're going into there because he didn't have the time. Like, if he
are we
had,
talking about the cut or Filoni?
well, he's both, because he's working with Filoni's material, and Filoni is
Yeah.
limited also.
Yeah.
If they spend an episode on that, yeah, maybe. But like,
But I just
they had
think that live or die. Yeah. No, I hear you. I just mean that it's in the start of that scene. The messaging is live or die, and it gets reiterated throughout the course of those scenes. But we're
What would it
not
be then?
seeing.
Grow.
Oh, you want me to be?
Grow or
You
stagnate.
want me to actually come up with the words apart from grow or stagnate? Um.
It's a choice. Like, that's what he's boiling it
Yeah,
down
it's
to.
a choice, but it's not a choice about death. It's a choice about growth. Because living is living. You can continue to persevere as you are when you live, and death is about just giving up altogether.
Yep, it
But it's
comes
not about
down
that.
to whether you want to love or hate.
Yeah. Do you want to be or be more? It's more like that. It's more like, do you want to be or be? Do you want to kill, or do you want to kill, or do you want to heal? Like, or
I
do you
think
want
that
to? Do you
it's
want
getting
war or
sidetracked
cultivation?
because what it comes down to in the end, she has this scene where she's talking about it. I don't know. She was on the ship somewhere, and she was watching a video back of Anakin, and he
Yeah.
was giving an additional speech, and he's saying he was always on my side, you know. So it was more about that relationship. It was something
Yeah.
something to do about them rekindling that aspect. She'd forgotten
Yeah.
about him, and
Yeah.
she'd pushed it away, and he was trying to jolt it out of her. That's what that
Yeah.
scene meant to me. It didn't really. It wasn't
Yeah.
really like literal. in
Yeah,
terms of that.
I think for me that
I know,
that whole
Yeah,
sequence,
I know what you mean because he uses those words, and it felt out of place because we'd never seen
Yeah.
anything before that
like he's trying
to
to
indicate
push her
that she was
to
suicidal.
push through. Like,
You know,
yeah, yeah. Like I think that's what the idea was for her, was him to say, do you want to give up and die now, or do you want to, live?
yeah.
I just think that um, there could have been some different choices with either dialogue or something, because
I think
I
I
think
found
those
it here
sequences about her in the Clone Wars and stuff, the messaging there was just different.
because he had that scene where he gave one last speech to her, and he said um, he was basically praising her. It was really nice to hear that because it was his final message to her. It actually really closed a lot. It was like a lot of closure, and that was really the end of this arc. Not what we saw. I don't think you saw the second half, but this came. And
I
this
haven't
was,
had a chance,
yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, this was more the closure of that emotional arc, you know.
Right.
And so quickly, I didn't have many more comments, but I wanted to talk about, because we are talking about it, this idea in writing, open loops, and we've talked about it a lot is in terms of arc. We say, oh, it's a person's arc, a character's arc. You know, they
Yeah.
do this, they want this, they come to that. But I've been reading recently this Getting Things Done, and it's a productivity book. Have you heard of this, David Allen? But he's got this whole system that it's a very psychological thing. Like if we have something that we want to change in the world, like I need to, I ought to, I should, it's actually an open loop in our head. And so the best way to become like in a state of martial arts flow is to empty our mind of all those things so you capture them. And that's kind of like what I do here. You know, I just dump it all here because it's in my head and I don't want to think about it anymore. And I know that we're going to have to talk about it. So it's better that it's in here and then I can sort of babble on rather than in my head where I'm constantly thinking about it. And so that's the concept, but it's in writing. It's the same thing. So this is Game of Thrones. We've talked about this in great lengths, but the big arc of Game of Thrones is who will sit on the throne. You know, that's the huge arc. It's the whole story arc. But then in the middle, you've got these little mini arcs like Dany marries Drogo. Will she be okay? Oh my God, Dragon Mama is go. You know, mini arc. But then finally, you've got this arc. Dany is all the mad. What's going to happen? Fire. And you know, this is where it fell for me because like that arc was too small for the impact. Like it started off as in one episode and actually ended in the next episode, and like too much happened and it was in too short a time
Yeah,
for
that's
that to
why
be.
it didn't resonate with anyone.
And the same for Bren. It's like, wait, no, is Bren the Game of Thrones? This mid character that we
Yeah.
don't really
And
align
then he
with,
says, Bran the Broken.
and we're meant
It's
to
like the
buy
worst.
it. And so
Yeah.
that's where like this stuff is so important. You need to have all of the pieces in place for that big open loop, and it comes down to this also. Like you've got the character, their sort of desires. So the character's in their comfort zone, but they want something, and then they enter in an unfamiliar situation. Then they adapt to it. They get what they want. They have to pay a heavy price for it, which we never really see sometimes. That's not explored enough. But then they return to their situation, but they've changed. That's the whole sort of gist of storytelling, like good storytelling. Um, and like
Yeah.
when I was talking about Sabine, how they sort of they simplified the story too much because um, there was some complexity there, and there was a bigger arc. There was like a bigger arc for her that got chopped in half, and we don't relate to her character as much as we did. So they needed to fill it with something to give it, like there should have been a scene with Ezra, like if they filmed a scene like a flashback scene or something to give us that real bonded connection, but we didn't get that. So
Yeah.
we don't have that strong sort of motivation. She
Well,
really
we
wants
have
Ezra.
to be connected to the, like, if we're supposed to see a arc, we need to understand certain things that make us connected to that character in some way, which often requires vulnerability. I think vulnerability is a significant factor that lets people connect with characters. That's sort of like what some people call, like they have their failures, or they make mistakes or have their failures, that type of thing. It creates vulnerability, which allows people to empathize because we all make mistakes, but also it adds to the arc because it's about what they do with those things that happen, what they do with their vulnerabilities, their mistakes, those types of things. And but in order to be able to see that progress, you kind of need to see that there has to be a way that you can sort of like start to relate to this character in some way. Like they have a journey that they're on, and it's clear what, like, the thing with Sabine is that you knew that she wanted to see Ezra, but as you say, it would be good for that to connect because a callback or something that allowed us to understand why there was a connection to begin, like what the connection was, the depth of that connection, not just, oh, my friend's over in another galaxy. It'd be great if that person wasn't.
And Kai got it because there was a line in the original that said, "You're like a sister to me," and he cut that because he knew that immediately lessens
What the
the
hell?
relationship.
Yeah, why would you do? Yeah,
And like
this
he
is
said, like in Rebels, there was a hickey at one point, so there was some romance involved. I haven't seen Rebels, so I can't comment on it.
Well, that's the thing. So it's like it's so clear that it would, like, it's almost like someone said, we don't want that to be a romance. We want it to be about a depth of friend. We want it to be a Frodo and Sam moment.
It kind of was,
Like,
wasn't it? Yeah.
but the thing about
very
Frodo
neutral.
and Sam is that you watch this bond between them throughout the entire movies of Lord of the Rings.
And then he
you
says,
get that
"Take my ring,
explored.
Frodo. Take my ring."
And it's just like, I can't carry you. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
Oh, it's so moving.
It's
This is the best bromance ever.
yeah, best bromance.
But what do you think
but
about this idea of open loops?
I don't know if I quite follow it.
So you've got the
how
question,
it-
you've got the arc. Usually it starts with the question, who will sit on the Iron Throne? This is what you're really
Yeah.
defining. And then
Mhm.
will Dany be okay after marrying Drogo? That's an arc, and it's satisfying when she turns into the Queen of Dragons.
So you like these mini arcs that
it's kind of like, yeah, each story has a big arc that we follow, but we have to be invested like the whole way. Like you can't just like Acolyte's the best example of where the arc changed every episode. Like the intention changed. It wasn't an arc because we didn't know like what the intention was, and so we can't follow this whole story of like, oh, okay, this resolved that arc, that loop is closed. This is why we watch fundamentally.
so
We're trying to figure out.
So, yeah, so you're talking about there's a almost like just very, very much simplify it. They ask a question and the questions the loop starts with a question and ends with an answer,
Yeah.
for one of a better oversimplification.
Yeah.
So, and throughout the process, there's a continuing series of questions and answers. But if you create this increasing list of questions without any answers, it can disrupt things. But also, those questions and answers have to be tied to the overall loop.
Yeah.
Would that be a simplification of
Yeah. That's it.
what that
Yeah.
means? Yeah, I mean, but and that's about, particularly when you've got television series, you need to be able to manage that. And the best series do it in a way where it's almost like the questions and answers seamlessly sort of work together, where it doesn't feel contrived. If that makes any sense, like, sometimes, like when you like the old television series was literally just a small loop for every episode. It was a
Yeah.
loop for every episode. And then they started doing loops with an episode, but then they would slowly introduce some type of overarching arc. And then they've kind of, now what they've kind of done is they've gone all the way to the other extreme where they treat episodes as just a part of the overarching arc, and sometimes questions don't get asked or answered. It's just the one big question that occurs, and I think that's when the flow really gets broken.
Broken, or in like the cases, like I go back to Andor, it was amazing. Like we learned about his motivation in his first line. He goes, "What about this girl?" He's looking for his sister, and like he's always got that in his loop. That's part of his big loop, and he's always searching, and he's always got this really desperate, you know, need for the answer. But we don't even get it yet, so we got to wait for season 2. And it's kind of like this is why we keep watching. I think when you've got a series that does that well, like we know the once, and they're so instilled in your character and what their desires are and how they talk, how they act. This is what keeps us watching, and that's
Which
got to be
series was that?
Andor.
Right. Oh, the girl, as in the sister.
Yeah.
Do you mean that? Yeah. True. Yeah. And it was, yeah, that was lots of threads. But they had arcs even in those. Like there were Andor had these little threads in there that were added, and not necessarily, that was more like a whole series of circles of different sizes, some of which we haven't seen closed off yet. But also how some circles would immediately impact and interact with other circles. Like if you had multiple loops where at certain points they would intersect, because you would have the impact of what one character's own loop had on another character, like where they intersected, like the bad, what was the guy who's like fully into
Skarsgård.
capturing Andor?
Oh, sorry, not Skarsgård.
No. That guy who's like his mother's like over controlling, and he gets into this whole trying to remember what it was, but like he was the guy that was doing the investigation, and found out about Andor.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it all kicked
Yep.
off. And
like
they followed his whole loop, and there were points at which it interacted with other areas, like the spies loop, that lady spy, like all
Funny,
of
they don't
these
look anything
things.
like their I've just brought up their IMDb. Sorry about the brightness. They don't look anything like the characters in the show.
I want to see
Is this the guy?
which
Is that
one.
him?
Kyle Soller.
That's what you're talking about?
I think it's that guy, the Cyril Khan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy. And who's the lady below it?
I don't
So I
know.
have
They
to
look
wait.
so different is the thing.
I think it was the Denise Go, the Dedra Miro.
Oh, did you
But yeah, Dedra Miro is the was the he like she's the bad spy, the Empire lady,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh, yes, of
he
course.
forms an obsession with her and all. It's like
That's right. They
yeah,
look so different, hey?
yeah, it's so good though. I love that series.
And that's what I mean. Like, we're so invested because they've set up the loops. And like you say, it can get as complex as you want. These can interact in a way that flips the loop. Like, we expect one thing,
Mm.
but it immediately changes its direction because of a certain thing
Mm.
that happens. That's when you're getting really complex. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
simple like this. I think this is just the very basics of what you need.
Yeah, it's like an
and
exemplar
and
of
shows don't do
the
even
way that it
this,
works.
So
Well, yeah, like the old, as I said, the old series were like each episode was just this like formula. And then people started playing with the formula and figuring out how can we turn a movie into a television series.
there
And then
against
how do we
money.
come out of it?
I
And
still
some
think that
also
people
like
are
sorry.
striving to. I still think people are striving to tell better stories. Like, it's just
Mm.
a matter of ability and whatever experience.
Well, when you were talking about Game of Thrones, it brought a few things up for me, apart from the scars, of like the funny thing about Game of Thrones was that there were people who had arcs that you didn't even think would have arcs, like the Hound, right? Where this guy is just introduced as this brutal king's, killer. And he's introduced as someone you don't like, but he goes through this entire arc where he goes like where you learn more about him and he has this interaction with Arya Stark, and it goes in all of these interesting directions, and it's an exploration of this character. And he has an arc that goes all the way through with a whole series of twists and turns for his character,
Yeah.
that you never expected to happen.
No.
And I think that's why the series ended so poorly for people, was that there was so much complexity, and that
But
the
the one
development of
motivating
these
factor was
characters.
him and his brother, though. That was consistent, right?
Well, that was a consistent characteristic of his motivations for doing things, but it wasn't his. But that was almost like that's the overarching thing. But then you started to get all of these nuances to his character by the way that he interacted with Arya. It was like an opportunity for him to be humanized, which was really interesting. And I think the reason that Game of Thrones fell so flat, because I've been trying to figure out why didn't it resonate, and people would say that it just was too quick in some ways. Some people would say that they didn't believe that this character would do that, or that it wasn't in this character's arc. It shouldn't have gone in that direction. I think it was that they decided that they were like, "Hey, I'm bored. Let's cut a whole series of beats to a person's arc out and just jump to the conclusion." Because you could certainly make it so that Danny went crazy and started killing people, but it just happened too quickly. It skipped a whole bunch of steps to get to that arc,
Yeah.
and just hoped that the pieces that it led in a very short space of time would explain all of that. But the problem is that everyone was used to these beats playing out over seasons, not over episodes.
Yeah.
So it was just like completely disjointed in comparison to what everyone had experienced up until that point.
Yeah.
So
100%.
yeah,
The length
Is it?
of the arc is also important. That's my point here. Like, it's got to give enough time for the audience to catch up, because if you're just pushing and pushing, that's too fast.
Yeah. Well, like
Um,
even the Red Wedding, like people might say, well, the Red Wedding is an example of how it can change direction so quickly. That's true, but none of that was in conflict with the motivations or the ultimate, uh, like that was a subversion of an arc, but it wasn't actually because you were seeing everyone's arc going in a direction, and then it completely pivoted because of an event that happened.
Yeah.
It was imposed upon them. Whereas in the case of like her going crazy and just like burning everyone, that wasn't a that wasn't a that was a series of events that was supposed to push her in a direction to do that, but you were playing too much with the character. It wasn't. You are asking people to believe in a change in a person's perspective, which is contrary to everything that's led up to the way that her
Character
viewpoint
behaves.
and
Yeah.
things have been going. Yeah, her behavior, her series of responses and behaviors to things. Yes, there were indications of that, but they were only indications. They weren't like something that would lead to what ended up happening in comparison to other things. But the Red Wedding was literally someone else's character motivations, which were very clear, intersecting and creating an event. So it's like the Starks motivations and things were very clear. There was they didn't act contrary to their characters, and what happened at the Red Wedding was not in contrast to the other characters' motivations. It was an intersection of an event that changed the course of things. Whereas the Danny thing was literally the act was about character motivation and behavior.
Yeah, and they needed to
you're
insert
expecting it to
more
change that.
stuff to indicate that that's what's going for it to land. For us to actually accept that huge change. They needed
also,
more
you were
time.
supposed to. It was almost like, as well with the loops, it was almost like they wanted to close a whole bunch of loops in a very if you had all of these if you're thinking in terms of like a trajectory. A loop is, if you're going to create a circle, you create a pace for that circle, but you don't go suddenly. You're not turning it into a spiral where it goes,
And then it just chops down.
which is
Well,
because
they had they had to finish all the characters. They had to tell about Arya, they had to tell about the Hound, they had to tell about Jaime, they had to tell Cersei. All of these things had to close off. So suddenly there's not enough time to do it all.
And they went around.
They all just popped.
And that's the thing with, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're not seeing him actually finish his book, is because he's created all of these loops, and how does he close it off in a way that isn't feeling rushed?
It's good that he's taking time with it, eh?
I'm not in a position to say. I think you've got a lot of people who are saying he should have finished it 20 years ago.
Well, at least he'll write the story that he wants. It's better than pushing out something that is a reaction to the TV show. Like if it's...
I think it's what some people would say is if he finishes it.
How old is he?
I think, is he in his 70s or 80s or something? I don't know.
Right, okay. He's not going to make it. Oh, well. I got some bad news for you, man. The, that thing that we listened to, that was AI. Sorry.
Seriously?
Yeah. I've got it up here. Made by Google. Amazing technology. I was shocked when I first heard it. How real it sounded. I just put up our transcript and it made that whole thing up. And it was so believable and well...
That is so insane, you asshole. You made me think that we were relevant.
I didn't want to break your heart. I was actually tempted not to tell you, but
my heart is broken. You would have had to tell me at some stage.
I didn't know if I was going to, because you look so happy. I thought you would have saw through it. Actually, I thought you would have been skeptical.
But no, well, you had it moving fast, so it's like, he's got it on 1.5 speed, like he's playing back.
No, I thought you would have said, "Oh, okay, this has got to be something. This has got to be AI." I didn't think you would believe it straight away.
I was totally. I was in a state of shock that someone actually had listened to our thing.
But it's nice, right? I had felt those same emotions. Like it actually knows what we want as content creators, and it's taking it actually made a better podcast than we could because it condensed it down to 7 minutes, and it took us on an arc. It started asking us questions, and pulling apart our podcast, and like as an audience, we're actually asking better questions than what we ever ask our audience members. And
That
it
is
left it on a
amazing.
high. It left it on a high. It sort of.
That's
So
amazing. I don't think we should create. I think we just need to record our voices so that the AI picks it up, and then just we enter in what we think we should be saying to each other, and we let it go. Who cares about our own thoughts? That's
yeah,
crazy. That's amazing.
it is amazing, eh? But
It's
any
it's
last
scary
thoughts
as hell.
on Ahsoka?
I think we need to. I think we need to murder all AI. But in terms of Ahsoka, I am going to watch the second half of it. I just it's been a bit crazy lately, but I would love to see the end of it. And look, I'm kind of looking forward to season 2 after watching the Patterson Cut and seeing where it goes. So because you see some people who don't learn from their mistakes. You see some directors and writers and people who go in there and they create something. People respond to it in a way, and they say, and they're like, they're too arrogant to learn from that and grow. I kind of feel, I mean, I do feel there's an echo chamber over there, but at the same time, I think that Filoni and some of the actors will be listening to, maybe not to us, but maybe to the AI.
Well, our thoughts in the end weren't very disparaging of the original series. I think Chris didn't like it, and that sort of influenced sort of your opinions of it. But when we were watching it, we were quite enjoying it. Seeing Thrawn, and
Yeah.
like there was stuff that was disbelievable. Like we actually said, Thrawn is where is it, a villain with potential,
Yeah.
and so there's still
And
that
he is.
potential. Yeah, there's still, and it's amazing to see Balin. And I don't know what they can do with it, but I really hope we can close that arc, that loop, because it is an open loop, and I'm waiting for whatever happens.
Yeah, I've seen some people speculating on who the actor is that's going to take his spot.
Oh, so there will be.
Actually,
Okay, that's good. At least they'll
Oh,
continue the story.
that's the speculation. I think it's speculation at this point, which is, what was his name? He was Wolverine. He played Wolverine's brother, Hugh Jackman's.
Wolverine's brother, hey?
Victor Creed, who was played by
Sabretooth.
yes, Sabretooth. He was played in
Oh, that guy. Yeah, what's his name? Liv Schreiber. Liv
what?
Schreiber.
Is that his name?
Bring it up.
Here we go, Wolverine. You're probably right. I just haven't heard that.
This guy.
Yeah, Liev Schreiber, yeah. I didn't know that was his name.
He's married to Naomi Watts, I think.
Is he?
I think so.
Good on him.
So doesn't show anything on IMDb anymore. It used to show all that stuff.
Children, relatives, Pablo Schreiber. Children, spouse, Taylor Neeson. No.
Ah, right.
Did not say.
Partner was Naomi Watts, but they left in 2016. It used to be.
Who the heck is it? Don't you love stalking people?
Yeah, he's a great actor. I'll be happy if he plays Balin.
You'll see. Yeah.
But yeah, and they've set up Sabine and Ahsoka in a pretty good spot. They're together, and they're on this planet trap. So there's questions to be answered, and I'm happy exploring that stuff.
Yeah.
Doesn't need
As
to
long
be
as
a
it's the Last
succinct.
Jedi answer.
Well, it doesn't need to be synced
Turns out
as.
that he was only there for the architecture. He just
No,
wanted to learn how to be a stonemason.
yeah, but I mean, it doesn't have to be a Kai Patterson cut for me to enjoy it. Like, I'm happy to sit and watch 10 episodes of it and at a slower pace. Like, it's nice that he's doing this stuff, but I don't see it as
Oh,
like
yeah.
essential.
If it's if it's well written, then it's well written. You know, that's all I'm really hoping for. I think there's potential with the characters and the environments. I did kind of like how there was a bit of a almost Lord of the Ringsy vibe to it. You know,
Yeah,
with that.
fantasy, like proper
I didn't
fantasy.
actually
They're
mind that.
riding the Borg. They're Borg riders, basically, aren't they? On those rats.
Warg,
Warg?
not Borg.
Sorry, I'm thinking of the
They're
Star
not
Trek.
part machine. Sorry,
But
laughing at.
no, yeah, I agree. There's like elements to this. I enjoyed the samurai stuff. Like it was a theme through this. You know, there were big nods to the Eastern filmmaking, and
Yeah, I just find the only thing I find with some of those nods is that like I get there's a real enjoyment for the samurai film, but these days you kind of have to like have you seen there's an amazing series called Shogun, and that really is an exploration of the culture, not just what like that whole samurai thing, but the actual Japanese culture,
yeah,
which gives
I haven't
like
seen it. No.
kind of it's good. It's really good because it explores why there's a lot of state emotion, why there's a lot of like there's not a lot of expression of emotion, and like and that kind of explains a lot of what it is to be a samurai. That not it because it doesn't talk about samurai, but it kind of explains why this idea of, you know, the quiet, contemplative, non emotionally expressive character exists. But ironically, that actually is in conflict with the idea of what the Jedi is about. Because that whole thing is steeped in an idea of non-expression of emotion and saving face and all of that type of stuff. Whereas Jedi, if you go by what some of the characters have said in that, it's about compassion and
But at the end of the day,
peacekeeping.
it's entertainment, and we are watching a TV series, and like we're smart
You
enough
can
to
say that
know
about
that.
everything.
No, that we're smart enough to know that this is a nod to that genre of filmmaking. You know,
Yeah.
like,
If you know that that genre exists.
but we do.
We do.
Yeah, and so we don't have to be colored by those decisions. We can just enjoy it for what it is, like an homage. Other
But if
things,
you watch, but a
like
homage,
like
if you pick
like an
if
artist, a
the series
musician
is
can
a
make a
homage
cover
to
of
that,
something, and like we really appreciate a cover. Why is this any different?
because when you do a cover from start to finish, you know it's a cover. When you do a homage in a series and you pick parts of it as a homage and other parts of it aren't, it sort of breaks that homage. And it's like, because like a homage in and of itself is like you're setting a series of rules and constraints, and this is what it is to be the homage so that people can actually recognize it for what it is and understand it. But if you do a part homage, then it kind of breaks that. It's just like, well, we're kind of, it's like in a way, it's like half-assed homage
But you know,
to
like
me.
the Mando, for instance, that was a Western homage, and like, why was that different? Why did that pull it off, and this didn't? Because we never see Mando's face. He is a very stoic guy. Um,
Because I think that whole samurai thing, there's the homage to samurai doesn't quite have, it's Star Wars
but it's
and a
not just
homage.
samurai. It's like it started off with Akira. Started off with Japanese anime. She's on this
Yeah.
bike screaming down this thing. That was a huge nod to Akira, I think.
That's a
And then,
nod, not a homage.
yeah, well, that's what I'm
To
saying.
me, like,
It's a
well,
nod.
to me, what I mean is like, I think maybe I'm getting confused because I'm talking about genre more than homage. Like a callback is one thing, but if you're picking a genre, people can relate to the genre. But a homage is taking you out of what you're watching so that you can appreciate a callback,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Which,
that
if you do it incorrectly, if you pick the wrong time to do it, takes you out of that, and you actually it
But
breaks
we
your
only
investment.
see it here. Well, I know it bled into how she portrayed her character, but we were only seeing it in the action shots. So it's kind of like you switch off and you know this is what you're going to get. You're going to get an Akira scene. You switch off,
Yeah.
you get a Bruce Lee fight where it's going to be over the top. And you're going to get a forest scene where it's all slow motion kung fu. It's kind of like you're accepting we switched off in that Indiana Jones bit and we enjoyed it. We knew it was an Indiana Jones bit. Why is that fine?
Well, you weren't like, why is it fine? Because I guess but you could call it an Indiana Jones bit, but it didn't have to be seen that way. Like, I'm not saying that it wasn't it was inspired by Indiana Jones. It wasn't necessarily a callback to Indiana Jones. Like, if it was a callback to Indiana Jones, she'd walk out of a hall and a rock would start chasing her down a hallway. That would be a callback to Indiana Jones.
I think what
Like,
it is like Filoni loves these things. Like he loves
yeah.
the films and those. He's trying to because I love Indiana Jones, so I love seeing that. So it's kind of like he doesn't see any other why people wouldn't love it. Like we might not be aware of Bruce Lee and like all of his his body of work. So we might not love it as much as Filoni did making that scene where Ahsoka did a Bruce Lee thing, Or,
Yeah.
the samurai stuff. Like he probably gets off
Yeah.
on that, but I haven't really been exposed to as much as that. But he gets an emotional hit from it, so maybe that's
Yeah.
it. He
But
as a
that's
filmmaker is just making
if
things
you
that he
have
loves.
but if you have that many callbacks to that many multiple different inspirations for this person, um, you have to be that person to appreciate what you're watching.
He's making it for himself, which is
Hmm.
fine, kinda. Like
Kind of
at least it's consistent because that's what he loves.
consistent, but it's consistent to him, but not to anyone else.
And it's up to people like Kai to just chop that stuff out, and it can be completely different without those things. And we've seen that.
Yeah, well, it goes to show that it's actually not as significant. Those scenes aren't as significant if they're cut out. And you can see why I kept them in if they are callbacks.
But I mean, if it changes to the actual essence of a scene by removing a long shot of a face expression and just cutting to the next kick and speeding it up a bit, it changes the whole thing. It's no longer an homage. It's actually just with different music. It's just a fight scene. It can be whatever you want.
Yeah. So, but if you're investing in trying to make it a callback, you may be taking the callback out of context, which actually makes it detrimental to the show. Like if you're investing in making sure that people know that you've done a callback, you're taking people out of the show so that they can appreciate a callback. Whereas the most important thing should be the flow of the show and the story and all of the callback should be, if you're going to do a callback, it has to work in the context of the show. You shouldn't be pulling people out to do a callback.
But then I think about when Boba Fett first got introduced. Who was it? Who was that director that they got on for that episode in Mando? He ended up directing all of it in number 2.
Rodriguez?
Yeah,
It was something
Rodriguez. So he's got a very certain filmmaking style, right? Robert Rodriguez.
He likes his slow motion action car chase scenes.
Well, that's the thing, and that was his DNA.
motorcycles.
Whereas Filoni, he had to be a chameleon. He was sort of changing episode to episode in Clone Wars. I think that's his DNA. It changes. He doesn't really stick to. There's no Filoni style, and he's just borrowing bits and he's experimenting and he's
Which and to me, that sometimes feels a bit less like genius is what is it like? Someone borrows, genius is steal, or something. I'm not sure what the phrase is, but like I don't like watching a director where you can pull every scene that he's stolen from somewhere else, because that doesn't sound to me like someone who's got their own ideas. It's like that sounds like someone who just likes to incorporate what he's seen somewhere else into something.
I reckon that scene with Anakin though, that was pure Filoni with Anakin and Ahsoka. I think that was a core pivotal point in this
Yeah.
whole thing. That was him. I think that was his DNA. The rest of
Yeah.
the other stuff, I think that's his borrowing. He just because he's never had like a full time. He was always the assistant director. He was always just sort of someone else does it, and I'll just guide it. But now he's got to come up with something from scratch,
You
and
got to
he's
come up with the goods, yeah.
he's like borrowing as much as he can from things that he knows will work for him. So I don't know. It is a bit sort of all over the shop, but
Well, I know that he's also learning. Like it's a process of learning from him because he's gone from animation to live action. And
Yeah.
that's got to be like being a director is not an easy gig, obviously.
I actually know that he likes storyboarding, so maybe that's how it all translates. He does a good storyboard of it, and then it ends up looking like a cartoon, like an homage, because it's the way his process is. Rather than like
some
someone
of
like
his episodes have been great. Like his standalone I've really liked a lot of his standalone episodes. Like I like the one where Ahsoka was first introduced to Mando. I like that episode.
that was him, was
You
it?
know the one. Yeah.
Yeah,
he did a few. I really liked his standalone
in the base
episode.
where she was outside. Is that the one?
But it's the one, yeah, where she had to break in and capture that lady that we
Don't
saw
remember
in
it too well.
the
I mean,
series.
all that Mando stuff was great.
But yeah,
I definitely acknowledge what you're saying, though.
you better.
Should we call it?
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Thanks. No, that was good. That was really good. That was good discussion, I think.
And
We'll have to see what the AI thinks later.
Yeah.
So depressed now.
It's crazy, hey? All right, thanks, everyone. Stopping now.
Bye. Stopping.